Hi, and welcome to On Air with Vyaire, podcasts from the front lines, an educational podcast series featuring discussions with frontline medical experts about their experiences ranging from airway management or the dynamics of recognizing, preparing, and managing patients with COVID-19. At Vyaire, we are truly proud to partner with you on the front lines of the COVID-19 global health crisis, and thank you for the work you are doing to help improve outcomes for patients with COVID-19 around the world. The host of Podcasts from the Front Lines is Vyaire Vice President, Medical Director Michael Pedro, MD. This episode is focused on Update on Remdesivir in Treating COVID-19 and features our guest medical expert, Dr. Stephen Minear, Director of Research for the Center for Hospital-Based Specialties, the Cleveland Clinic, Florida Region, Weston. This podcast is for educational purposes only. The scientific exchange content in the podcasts from the front lines may address the off-label use of Vyaire devices and supplies that are the sole responsibility of the device or supplies owner, and is undertaken with the understanding that the owner assumes all liability for such use.
On today's episode, we'll provide an update on the recent Remdesivir evidence, as well as discuss the effects social distancing has had on flattening the curve and the controversy of immunity certification with COVID-19. Joining us again today is Dr. Steve Minear, board certified in anesthesiology and critical care medicine, and currently associate staff at Cleveland Clinic, Florida, Region Weston. We also have with us today from Vyaire Medical, Kyle Turner, who's one of our clinical specialists. Welcome, Kyle, and welcome, Dr. Minear.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so last time we were on, you went through a list of drugs, what their effects were, and since then there's been a recent clinical trial that came out in the New England Journal of Medicine. What are your thoughts on that trial?
The trial that you're referring to is about Remdesivir, and Remdesivir appears to be the new hot topic for the treatment of COVID in the United States and worldwide. And that data set is very interesting because it is not robust, but there's a couple of big studies that are probably coming, probably being the important word, that are probably going to support its use. The study that you're referring to, and I'm going to pull it up on my screen, essentially is studying the compassionate use of Remdesivir for COVID-19. Now that is essentially, it is not a randomized trial. It is a very large-scale case series where that company, Gilead, was able to recruit into their study many hundreds of patients that by their definition required Remdesivir. And that study is not clear about how that criteria were made and how those groups were selected in order to receive Remdesivir. So this is a very interesting study that does track a group of patients that got COVID-19 and subsequently got Remdesivir. And of those patients, some did recover. I think saying more about that study is very difficult to make any more definitive conclusions about that. It is not meant to be a comparative group, so there's no treatment group that did not receive the drug or received any other standard of care. So it's very interesting to see a trial like that with known problems. These are problems that you don't have to be a research specialist to receive warning signs about that. It's very interesting to see drugs like this that come to market that people are very worried and very upset and very nervous and searching for curative options in a sea of data that is very murky. So that study has a lot of problems with it as a study. But as a data set, it looks like that the Remdesivir group does pretty well, or that they might have some evidence of recovery using that drug. Now, in addition to that, pair that study with the large NIH-funded study comparing, it's an adaptive control study where they did give Remdesivir to a control arm. Now that study is an adaptive study, which is a very interesting and unusual trial design. What it does is it allows for randomization and the process of a controlled trial to take place, while during different interim analyses, they are able to change the sample size, change the focus of patient recruitment, switch one group to the placebo arm if they find that it's working. It allows for flexibility in an area of great uncertainty. And I think everyone can agree that the treatment of COVID-19 is a very large black box and doesn't have any clear-cut answers. This is a trial that is meant to be facile and flexible enough to come to real conclusions. And the reason they're able to do that and be flexible is because they've a priori set their hypotheses, and they've a priori said we're going to change X part of the trial if during an interim analysis that it looks like it might be more favorable to go in a different direction. And this is where the beauty of real research comes into place, and it's starting to replace with high quality data the sort of I'm going to use the word panicky publication of data that is not really well controlled and not designed to be thorough data sets. They're designed to be, look at what we found, and here's a case series, and here's a small group of patients that found a benefit because people are searching for options, and people around them are suffering, and they feel the need to offer things to patients. That trial is not yet published and won't be published for months. What has happened with that trial, the ACT study, is that they've already reached a conclusion, meaning that their p-value has become low enough that they can be confident that even when the trial is over, there will still be a statistically significant time to improvement using remdesivir relative to the comparative arm, which is still being defined. Now, saying that there will be a statistically significant difference is a strong statement, but it has to be followed up with clinical endpoints that are important. There's time to recovery using a very non-granular ordinal scale of whether a patient has had mortality versus is on the ventilator versus feeling well. These are very blocky data sets, and we're still waiting to see for real clinical endpoints that would be interesting. And I think those data sets are a long way off. So we're all very encouraged to see that trial publish an interim analysis, or I should say a statement regarding an interim analysis. But none of us have seen any of the trial data in any public way. So we're all waiting to see the strengths and weaknesses of that study, the final sample size, the final strengths and limitations, and the safety profile of the drug, all of which are not have not yet been established.
Right. I know the study in New England Journal of Medicine, the group that they looked at, there was some questions as to whether or not many of them already would have recovered, as it seemed like they started the drug later in the course of the disease, and many of those patients weren't on ventilators or had some mild symptoms. Do we know anything what the patient demographic looks like in the next study that you were referring to?
Yeah, we do, and that's what makes that study unique and different. Is that if you can go, these studies are published. These trial protocols are published designs. So in an effort to make transparent, and that really increases the quality of the data sets, is that before you start the study, you tell people what you aim to do, what problems you foresee, when you would make a change, and how you would make that decision. Setting those objectives up front really improves the quality of the data and the trustability of that data. If you do it behind a box of uncertainty, or if you don't publish your methods, or even if you publish them after the fact, that can set up a situation in which people will always be questioning those data sets. And so these people that are in this trial are in the ACT study have a clearly defined set of parameters for inclusion and exclusion, and they're quite extensive, of course. So we won't maybe mention all of them.
Sure.
But suffice to say, there will be a group of patients that will be studied that will be a priori defined. And that's what makes it different than the previously published data on remdesivir.
That's exciting.
It's coming.
So, I mean, the first trial that we're alluding to, were there any other biases that you thought might go into that study?
For the New England Journal of Medicine paper, there are a obvious set of biases, and the thing that comes to everyone's mind right away is that there is no control arm. There just doesn't exist. Now, that was for reasons that me and you have spoken about on previous podcasts, and that there is a lot of reasons after the fact for me to tell you why that might be. And one of the most important, and the one that I predict that these groups will use, is that it's unethical to not offer a treatment option to patients, where in other cases there is a treatment option available of undetermined significance. In the previous podcasts we spoke about, there was no control arm in this study because it was unethical to not give hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine to a group of patients. In this study, there again is no control arm, and that is the obvious part of this study that makes it difficult to draw meaningful conclusions from. Now, people have talked about why they chose to do that, or why it was designed this way. And those questions need a response. And I won't weigh in on why somebody did something. I think it's important that the authors have an opportunity to explain why they chose to do these data sets. And the answer is likely something along the lines of, we were interested in getting the data out to the public as quickly as possible. That is something that's common. And we've seen it before, and we've seen it on different trials. People are just trying to get data out there because they think that the data by themselves has value. And that's something that we'll have to see. We'll have to see moving forward as to whether or not this is a significant improvement. Talking about a time to recovery or mortality, these are questions that still need answers. And that is the obvious thing that doesn't happen in these patients. There are a slew of other limitations to this study that every study has. There's a couple of people that are lost to follow-up. There's no real primary endpoint being, again, the inclusion criteria for this study was not published. It was a lot, don't forget, many people were applying for compassionate use for remdesivir. Many people, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of patients were asking for this drug. And the final study had several hundred. And these companies, they don't have access to, they don't make the drug fast enough to give it to everybody. So there is a compassionate use algorithm by which they use, and there's many to get the drug. There is no published algorithm that I'm aware of in which those inputs were sorted, stratified, and made to create the study. It seems like they gave it to certain groups of patients. And I have no way of knowing a priori what their thought process was, because it wasn't published.
Gotcha. Well,
so we'll have to see. The new study that's coming out should be very meaningful, and it should be very informative, because it does have those a priori published decisions.
Yeah, and I have to assume that if we see good results, even during the test, that are overwhelming, that they would probably stop the study
and they have, and that's something that they have. By overwhelming, you mean
statistical significance.
Takes the primary endpoint to the point of that even if every single other patient in the study doesn't have a negative outcome, you would still have a statistically significant difference in your primary outcome. And so that's what, once you can make a confident statement like that, that's a data-driven statement that the time to recovery is improved. Now, we're still waiting on several secondary endpoints in that study. Most importantly, arguably, is the mortality rate. The mortality rate in the announcements that have been made to the public were not yet, I would say, are not statistically significant, but there is, of course, a trend towards significance, and that would be biologically plausible given that the time to recovery has increased. That trend towards significance is, in fact, not significant, and it's important to know that. And that study is not powered to see a mortality endpoint, because that's not the primary objective. The primary objective was a time to improvement, time to clinical improvement. So that's the kind of studies that we'll be dealing with. Again, the primary outcome is very unlikely, is statistically unlikely to be unchanged at this point. But the secondary outcomes, which are usually hypothesis generating, meaning this will probably set the stage for an even larger study or a more focused study that will use mortality as their primary outpoint of mortality, because that's something that, of course, we care about a great deal.
Yeah, and this study will give us more indications in terms of what that sample size would look like based off of the results from whatever the mortality incidence is.
At the end of the day, of course, we want to make sure that we're helping patients and that their time to recovery goes up. That's one aspect of that, but it's not the whole picture. And frankly, no one ever said that it was. And so this is a very thoughtfully designed study that everyone is looking carefully towards the answers for. Don't forget, in this study, there should also be safety data. What we don't have any real information for is remdesivir safety in the COVID population. There are, in the New England Journal, I'm going to call it a case series, there are signs of harm. There are things that went wrong with these patients. Of course, they're very sick. And there's no way to tell if there's a signal there where these related to their primary disease process or were they related to remdesivir. Without a control arm, there's no way to generate that. There's no way to make a conclusion with that data.
Thank you for joining us today. To suggest a topic for future podcasts from the front lines or to stay informed, please visit us at Vyaire.com.